Welcome everyone to this episode of Technology Frustrations and Gimmicks, the show that educates the lost, the weary, and those that claim to know nothing about computers and technology. I'm your host and computer expert, Aaron Moss. This is going to be episode 1 of 10 total episodes, all dealing with ways to speed up your computer. And the reason why we wanted to do this episode is because the speed of your computer still claims to be the number one reason why people make calls into our call center and into our repair facility for speed. Computers seem to always eventually start slowing down. It's not something, it's something that we've generally expected and accepted into our lives, that the longer you have a computer, that it just starts slowing down. But believe it or not, there are over 100 things that actually cause a computer to slow down. And some of these things can be things that may apply to your circumstances in the way that you compute. Some of them may not. Some of them only deal with Windows. Some of them only deal with certain versions of Windows. Some of them even have to do with your style of computing. So we hope to go through 101 different ways to speed up your computer. And this is just episode 1. So the first one to kick us off is the use of the mouse instead of the touchpad. So if you have a laptop computer has what's called a touchpad. It's right below the keyboard. And you use your fingers and you swipe around this touchpad, and it's what moves the cursor arrow along the screen. You could actually move and do your computing a lot faster by simply just investing in a USB mouse for your laptop. Now this tip is only good for laptops or any type of device where you have a touch pad. So the use of the mouse is just faster. Okay, you can point and click a lot faster than you can with a touchpad. And if you are someone that uses a touchpad, just try it out. Try using a mouse instead of the touchpad, and you're going to see what I mean. And by using that extra device on your computer, you could actually get through the Windows and a lot faster just by pointing and clicking with a mouse instead of a touchpad. Number 2, increase your RAM. RAM, or RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory. RAM is a type of memory that only deals with things that are actively running on your computer. So therefore, for example, let's say that you open up a Word document or you open up a web browser. Okay, when those things are actively running on your screen, they're actually running in the type of the memory inside the computer that's called RAM. Now, your computer has a limit as to how much active programs can actually be running at any given time. So if you increase your RAM, you basically increase the ability for your computer to run multiple things at multiple times. So it can be easily illustrated by like a kitchen table. Let's say that you're baking a cake and you need space for the bowl, the mixer, the utensils, the pan that you're going to pour it in. You would need a large counter space or a table to do that. But suppose you only had a table, the size of a checkerboard, okay? Anytime that you would need to put something on the table, you would have to take it off and then put something else there. When you're pouring the batter, you would have to take the pan off and then just have the mixer there. And then when you're done with the mixer, you'd have to take the mixer off and put it away and put something else there. It would be nicer to just have a much larger table. That way you can spread everything out and get everything done a lot faster. That's the same concept of having larger RAM. The larger RAM, the more you can get done at while all of these applications are open, and you can get them done a lot faster. If you don't have too much, if you have too little RAM, what'll end up happening is, as you're switching between and clicking in and out of applications, the computer will have to remove running programs from the RAM back into the hard drive, and then when you want to access them again, it'll have to take it back out of the hard drive and put it back into the RAM when you're ready to use it again. That action of putting back and taking out and putting it live to active programming actually makes the computer slower. It may be just milliseconds when you do it, but when it's a large application that's running, you'll start to see patterns of how something that takes just a little bit longer, multiplied by many different hertz and cycles. And so if you add 1 millisecond to every single cycle, and it's tens upon thousands and sometimes millions of cycles, that can significantly increase the time it takes for things to get done, and it will slow your computer down. So the amount of RAM, I have to say, when we're recording this is August of 2019. If you were to buy a brand new computer at this time, you would at least have to have, at the very bare minimum, 4 gigs of RAM. 8 gigs of RAM is a little bit more robust, and people feel more comfortable with 8 gigs of RAM. Some of the gaming systems have 16, 32, 64 gigs of RAM. There are some systems with an excess of 128 gigs of RAM, but all of that starts to become unnecessary unless you're running a server system. So anything more than 8 gigs of RAM is really just overstepping it at this in the year 2019. Anything more than that is just overkill. Number 3, close programs that are not in use. So this is a pretty much an older tip, and this goes back to all the way back to any type of computing. The more that a computer is doing at any one time, the slower it's going to do each one of the things that it's doing. So for example, in 2019 that we're in right now, your typical Windows 10 computer, if you were to go into a big box chain and buy a brand new computer and turn it on for the first time, and then go into if you were to go into the settings and see how many programs are running in the background or how many services are running in the program, it's going to be several folds of that page. So somewhere in excess of maybe 50 to 200 services are running at any given time. Now, some of them are required, some of them are just convenient to be there, but if you can do a little bit of research and you can find out which ones that you really actually want running and which ones you don't, you can actually start to knock down some of these programs that are running in the background. Also, if you have a habit of never turning your computer off or closing programs as you're using it, you may start to notice that your computer is starting to slow down, only because you have had so much programs actually running that you forget to close them, and they're just sitting there idle, but still taking up space in your RAM that we talked about before and slowing you down. So the solution is to close programs that you're not using as you're going on. Make a little bit of a habit of that. If you're looking at a browser and you see you have a bunch of tabs open, just go up there and just say, nope, not using that no more. Close that. I'll get back to that. Some people have a fear. I know I have one customer who has a fear of losing work or losing a position or location on the internet, that if they close the tab, they're going to lose it forever. So you should be somewhat knowledgeable of how you got to everywhere where you are, and if it is someplace that you like to go back to a lot, just use it as a bookmark or shortcut on your desktop. Number 4, removing unused programs. So as you have your computer, you're going to be using different programs. You're going to be using and downloading different programs that may seem useful at the time, but if you haven't used a program in a while, okay, every so often you want to go into the settings of your computer, usually in the control panel on a Windows computer, and you want to start removing programs that you know that you're no longer using. The reason why you want to do that is because some of these programs, although you may not be using them, may be running processes in the background that you're not aware of that could be slowing your computer down. Also, anytime that you turn your computer on, your computer might be going through an update process, which is something else we can talk about with as far as speed goes. But every time you turn your computer on, it might, all of these programs that you're downloading and you have in your computer might be turning themselves on and searching the net for updates. So if it's a program that you're not really using that much, you don't really want a program that you're not really using that much to be taking up more time with running updates of something obviously that you're not using. Tip number 5, test your internet speed. Now this is something that I'm pretty passionate about, and we could always argue that the internet companies, they do this on purpose, but right now in 2019 there are some internet service companies that are advertising 1 gigabit speed, and which is just an amazing amount of speed. Now that may sound really nice, but are you actually getting it? So when it comes to computing, in order for you to get the top speed, all of the components in the chain have to be able to be compatible with that speed. So you can put a 1 gigabyte speed connection on an older computer, but the computer is not capable of going that fast. The Ethernet adapter or the LAN adapter on that machine may only have a max of 100 megabits, okay, or even 10 megabits. Or the router may have a limit of 100 or 10 megabits. So just by upgrading, your internet service all the way up to 1 gigabit may not be the ultimate solution for you getting a faster computer. Also, what tends to happen is if you're not regularly checking your internet speed, your speed can go down quite significantly and you won't even know it. I can't tell you how many times I've actually been on a job where a computer was running slow, and it turned out that it was their internet. I did a simple internet speed test, and there's plenty of websites that you can go to have that tested. Google has one, Ookla has one, probably your internet service provider has their own on their own website, but you can test your speed many different ways. If it tests way lower than what you're paying for, then you need to call the company. You need to tell them that you're not getting the speed that you're paying for. And sometimes it's a combination of resetting your own router, or sometimes they have to reset some other router outside of your house, or it may require them to send out a rep to check the wiring coming into your house and or the setup that you have. Whenever they do these speed tests, they always want to make sure that you're connected directly, hardwired to the router, and they love to blame the router that you bought, that you don't have, that you're not renting from them. That's why I always recommend that you always rent the router directly from the company. That way they can't use it as an excuse. And if they're running a special on a 1 gigabyte speed on your internet, go ahead and, if you can't afford it, just go ahead and get it. That way, if you ever have any problems in the future, number one, they can't blame the router because it's theirs, and they can't blame the fact that you don't have a high speed plan because you already have the highest thing that's out there. So those are just a few tips on testing your internet speed. Number 6, use a Fast DNS. DNS stands for Domain Name Server. So all websites believe it or not, have an IP address. Now, if you were to go to your favorite website, whether it be Facebook or Craigslist or YouTube, what you're actually typing into the address bar might be facebook.com or youtube.com or craigslist.com. What the computer does in the backside is it sends that name that we know and recognize to another computer, and that computer has an index or reference of what the IP address of that particular website, kind of like a phone book. You may know somebody by name, but you have to reference a phone book to get the phone number, and then the computer or the phone company knows which phone to ring based on the phone number, not necessarily a name. So a domain name server is a connection with another computer. Now, if you do not set your own DNS, by default it goes to your internet service provider. So if you have CenturyLink or Roadrunner or Cox or Xfinity or Comcast or AT&T, if you don't set your DNS, they will anytime you punch in an internet website on your computer, it will go to your internet service provider's default domain name server. Now, sometimes those domain name servers may take a little bit of time. There might be a lag of the time that it gets. That's when you get that little circle. Okay, so you may request a website, or you may click a link inside of a website, and you get that turning circle action on your browser. Many times that delay or that lag of that turning, your computer is not necessarily trying to download the website at that time. It's still waiting for the server to respond with the right IP address. So what you can do is you can program your computer to use a different, more faster DNS that will give you the IP address faster than the default. Google has its own, which is pretty fast. There's plenty of websites that you can Google and get free DNS settings, and basically that's just another IP address that you put into. You have to put the IP address of the domain name server into the internet settings of your computer, and the computer will start to use that server as your domain name server. And if it works faster, great, just keep it at that. But usually the default domain name server is not the fastest, it's just there by default. So if you want to speed up your internet connection, start looking into your domain name server settings. Number 7, upgrade to SolidState drive. So if you want a faster boot time or shutdown time or faster read and write times from your hard drive, definitely invest in a solid-state drive. Now, if you're getting a brand new computer, most brand new computers in 2019 already have solid-state drives in them. So if your computer is, if you bought your computer maybe 2017 or 2016 maybe or earlier, chances are you may already have a solid-state drive, but there's a good chance that you may have what's called a mechanical drive or a traditional drive. A mechanical drive, traditional drive, has moving parts, so it actually has spinning disc in there with a reader, kind of looks like a record player that's moving really, really fast. And anytime you request information, whether it be file or you're booting up or you're trying to pull up a file inside your computer, very, very quickly that drive spins that platter around and tries to read the information. It takes that information out of the hard drive, puts it into the RAM of the computer, and then displays it on your screen because it's become active at that point. So what a solid-state drive does is it makes that request and that moving that data from the hard drive to the RAM a lot faster. And it does that because instead of it having a spinning platter, it has cascading chips inside. So the chips are not limited by the mechanical delay of that drive. So it's more of a random than a linear access. So let's say that you have a file on your hard drive. When you make a request to pull up that file on a mechanical traditional drive, the traditional drive has to spin that platter around, okay, until it gets to that file, okay, and then the reader picks it up. Now that file may be split up into like 10 or 20 or sometimes even thousands of parts, and it has to read all of the parts of that file, put them back together into the RAM, and then display it on the screen. When it's a solid state drive, there's no spinning involved. It just knows exactly where to get it electronically and just pulls it up a lot faster. So the boot time and the read time is somewhere in like the 20 or 30 times faster than your traditional drive. Now if that doesn't seem like much, think of 20 or 30 times faster times several thousand cycles, and then you'll see some real difference in doing things from a solid state drive rather than a traditional drive. The next thing is to upgrade your processor to a faster benchmark. Now, this is an advanced move, so unless you have some training in computers, you really want to make sure that you have this done by a professional. So the processor of the computer is considered to be the brains. There's also the input-output modules and the bridges that are on the motherboard. So the processor is a piece of hardware, and the computer speed overall is kind of dependent on that processor. It's also the most heat generating component, and it needs to be cooled off pretty well. Also, something else you want to take into consideration before you're thinking about upgrading your processor is how well the case or the computer itself is able to dissipate heat. The fans or the cooling fans, exhaust fans on the computer may not be sufficient to support a larger, faster processor. Even if you can fit the processor in there, okay, you have to consider the heat differentiation. This is easier to do on desktop computers. If you're trying to upgrade your I would never upgrade a processor in a laptop. It's just not worth it. It's easier just to sell the laptop, back up your data, sell the laptop, and invest in something else that already has the processor in it. Every time that I upgrade a processor in a laptop, the results usually are less of what the end customer is expecting. There's always some sort of glitch or some sort of thing that was not looked at carefully enough, and it ends up being a project. So I usually don't, anytime a customer comes to me and they say they want to put a faster chip in there, and I look at the specs and the computer is a little bit older and it can't support the RAM or can't support a lot of the other components that would warrant a faster processor. Going back to the statement that we said before about in order for everything to run smoothly at the same speed, everything in the computer chain has to be able to support it. Therefore, if you want a faster processor, you're also going to need to see if the internet that you can support that speed. Your internet adapters, your Wi-Fi, your graphics, things like that. You want to make sure that everything is able to support that, and usually we run into problems with that if you're just upgrading the processor. But if you know that you can, and that your processor is in fact able to support all the other pieces of hardware and the software in the system, by all means, go ahead and upgrade your processor. Number 9, overclock the system. Okay, this overclocking is also a very advanced move. So basically, the way overclocking works is the BIOS, or the basic input-output system of the computer, sets the standard of how fast the system will go. Okay, there is a clock system, and it's the same type of clock, that just tells time. So you could actually adjust how fast that clock goes. So instead of doing, for example, if a processor was designed for 2.0 gigahertz speed, you can overclock it to 2.1. And although the processor was not designed to go 2.1 gigahertz, you could actually get it to go that if you overclock, if you tell the BIOS to actually to turn the clock faster, it'll actually start to send signals to that processor faster. And if the processor is able to keep up without making errors, then you're successfully overclocking the system. But what also happens, same thing with updating your processor, if you overclock the system too much, or you don't do it gradually enough, okay, or if you don't do it gradually to the point of checking to make sure that it's operating, you could quickly overheat the system, okay, because it's working faster than what it's supposed to be doing, but you have to also manage the heat that you get off of it. Also, you have to check for errors. So many times you'll get a blue screen of death or a black screen of death, and it'll have these codes that have to do that it's missing a particular cycle. Okay, and once it starts missing cycles, that's when you know you've gone too far and you need to back it up a bit. So right around that sweet part where it's just barely generating enough heat for you to dissipate fast enough, and it's not missing any cycles or popping up any errors, that's about you're pushing the max of your overclocking your system. And not all computers can be overclocked. It is a setting within BIOS usually. There's other ways to program the BIOS using an external switch of some sort. But again, this is something that you really need to know what you're doing in order to do it successfully. Number 10, upgrade your graphics card. Now, this is not something that is usually done with a laptop. This is usually something that you would do with a desktop. So the graphic card, or GPU, which stands for Graphic Processing Unit, it is responsible for displaying the graphics on your screen. It works in conjunction with the RAM in the computer. So if you want faster action on your computer, for example, when you're playing games, if the frame rate of these games, a lot of these higher end games, they will actually tell you what the frame rate of your screen is right inside the game. So if you are trying to increase the frame rate or the number of cycles per second that you're seeing in the game, which would actually have you do your computer or make the computer faster or slower, simulated to the user, you can upgrade the graphic card. When you're upgrading the graphic card, you have to take into consideration what the limitations of the motherboard are, what connectivity, what PCI cards slots are available on the bus, on the motherboard itself, and also some of these higher end graphic cards require auxiliary power. So you may even have to put a larger power supply and something that is able to deal with higher voltage and higher watts. When you're dealing with the higher power systems, they tend to also generate a lot of heat, so you need to make sure you have extra fans. But this is something somewhat advanced. You don't necessarily need a professional to actually install A lot of these things are plug and play. If you're comfortable with unplugging and discharging your system, taking off the covers and pushing in a new graphic card, a lot of these things are plug and play. Some of them have a plug and play where it'll only give you the basic graphics until you upgrade it online or use their installed DVD that usually comes with them. But upgrading the graphic card can in some cases drastically increase the speed and the speed action on your screen. Well, those are 10 tips in this episode 1 of 10 total episodes, all dealing with ways to speed up your computer. That is it for this episode of Technology Frustrations and Gimmicks, which is sponsored by Computer Doctor of Tucson, a licensed desktop and laptop service support center working on all makes and models of computers up to 20 years old. If you are on a tight budget, you can enroll in the Rent-to-Own program on laptop and desktop systems for families, schools, and businesses, with tech support included. Call their main number at 520-261-5508 or visit their website at computerdoctor.xyz. Computer Doctor of Tucson, where they always take good care of you. I know because it's my company. Let us know you're listening by making a comment or clicking the like button. Stay tuned for more episodes of our show. Until then, see you next time.